Well, good morning. On behalf of WILPF Boston, I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you here in the Jamaica Plain Boston Library and to those of you on Zoom. We are hoping that you will enjoy this history and learn from our WILPF Nobel Peace Prize winners, Emily Greene Baltz and Jane Addams. They strived for peace and justice, as we have to do now in our turbulent times. My name is Eileen Kurkowski. I'm a co-chair of the WILPF Boston branch, and WILPF is an acronym for the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. WILPF is a multi-issue organization that has attracted thousands of women over its 110-year history. We work to stay informed and to collaborate with others to be catalysts for peace and justice. Most of our work in the U.S. is covered in issue committees and in our branches. In the U.S., we have several umbrella issue committees, and the branches and members decide which they want to focus on. Now, starting at the top with this slide, I'll highlight one or two things that our U.S. committees are working on. For the Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance, members work to stop sanctions on Cuba and to take it off the U.S. terrorist list. For Women, Money, and Democracy, efforts are made to establish public banks and to take money out of politics. Obviously, that's difficult now with our oligarchies. The Disarm Committee is opposing the Ukraine-Russian war and the Palestinian-Israeli war, and wants to set up a feminist peace, which is what we're all about. A feminist peace is one in which there's a real security, which requires homes, jobs, and health care for all. The Advancing Human Rights Committee wants security for all also, and the adaptation of UN Resolution 1325 that requires women to be at all important decision tables, big or small. The Middle East Committee works to improve relations between its countries, and Earth Democracy works on climate change, clean water, and decreasing pollution. With our special UN status, WILPF brings several women to the UN Commission on the Status of Women to learn from other women. In the UN, nation representatives report conditions on their women and to brainstorm on solving problems. Please, for more information, just go to the material on the table in the room and check out our website, wilpfus.org. It's easy to join. Just press the top button on the right as you enter the website page. If you have questions, though, talk to the people wearing sashes today. I'm going to change the topic now and tell you a little about the Nobel Peace Prize. More than a century later, the Nobel Prize is still considered to be the most prestigious award on the planet. This prize validates why we are here today in the Women's History Month to learn from two very remarkable women. It all started with Alfred Bernhard Nobel. Mr. Nobel was a Swedish chemist, inventor, engineer, and businessman. He was born in Stockholm, Sweden, and had an early aptitude for science and languages. And he actually became fluent in 6 languages with private tutoring. He held 355 patents, but is best known for his invention of dynamite. During his life, Nobel was involved in various business ventures, including owning Bofors, that's B-O-F-O-R-S, a company he developed into a major manufacturer of cannons and armaments. When he passed away in 1896, Nobel left behind one of the world's largest private fortunes at the time. In his will, Nobel declared that his remaining fortune of $31.5 million Swedish crowns should be invested in safe securities to create a fund. The interest from this fund was to be annually distributed as prizes to those who have, quote unquote, conferred the greatest benefit on mankind in 5 categories: physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, and peace. It was difficult for me to find the dollar amount of the prize, so I'm sharing what information I did find. In 1903, Marie Curie, the Polish and naturalized French physicist and chemist who conducted pioneering research on radioactivity, became the first female Nobel laureate ever, and only person to this day to win 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different categories: physics in 1903 and chemistry in 1911. When the prize award started in 1901, the prize amount was $17,451. In 2021, this amount would be equivalent to $561,649. In other words, over $500,000. So much for the prize. Let's go on to the awards process. To be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, there's no specific requirement for an individual or an organization. The prize is awarded to those who have done the most or the best work for fraternity between nations, for the abolition or reduction of standing armies, and for the holding and promoting of peace congresses. The selection process is based on nominations, which must come from qualified nominators and to be submitted to the Nobel Committee by January 31st each year. These qualified nominators include members of national assemblies and governments, members of international courts, university professors in specific fields, directors of peace research institutes, previous Nobel Peace Prize laureates, current and former members of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. Expert reports by Norwegian and international advisors are provided to the Nobel Committee on the best candidates. The laureate is announced in early October, and the award ceremony takes place in December 19th in Oslo, Norway. Now I'd like to finish with this section with a little information more specific to Emily Baltz and Jane Addams. In 1931, Jane Addams co-shared the prize with Nicholas Murray Butler for the assiduous effort to revive the ideal of peace and to rekindle the spirit of peace in their own nation and in the whole of mankind. In 1946, Emily Greene Baltz shared the prize with John Raleigh Mott. He was awarded for his contribution to the creation of a peace-promoting religious brotherhood across national boundaries. Now for Baltz, with her work in WILPF and much more, she was one of the few laureates who had fulfilled all of the requirements in 3 categories. In other words, she had done the most or best work for the Brotherhood of Nations, the abolition and reduction of standing armies, and for the formation or popularization of peace congresses. I truly believe she is an unsung heroine. Thank you, that's my part. Our next speaker is Ellen Mass, also a Boston WILPF branch member. We credit her for suggesting having this event for Women's History Month.
I'm Ellen Mass, and I'm a member of the Boston WILPF chapter. I'm also a member of the Disarm Committee from the National chapter. And I'm going to introduce Katja after I give you this little presentation, because it is so good for me to share this veneration that we all feel about Emily and her counterpart, Jane Addams. is especially gratifying because she's so needed in to counter the destructive war mentality and culture we are facing today. When the Wellesley Peace and Justice Studies program, when Wellesley Peace and Justice program, WILPF and the Jamaica Plain Historical Society venerated her in 1966 with the grand 50th anniversary of receiving the Nobel Prize. A powerful impact was clearly made because afterwards, Wellesley initiated 2 intern spots in the Peace and Justice Studies program. And articles in local and Unitarian publications were written, which I've gotten today for you all to look at and take home. And you'll find on the table over there, just be selective. We felt in 1996 is when this anniversary took place, we had helped Emily take off once again to new heights, sharing some intimately of her words with over 100 persons. Her past global peace leadership, when she was so needed then at the turn of this past century. But we were wrong. She did not get inculcated into any mainstream women's movement, nor would she become a mainstream icon in the peace movement. I'm sure after this program, you'll maintain she should have and must in the future. To date, no one has matched Baltz's Renaissance capabilities and achievements in the world, from teaching students during 22 years to go from Wellesley to go into the city to discover the Slavic neighborhoods' realities of economics she was teaching, helping to form the League of Nations in 1920, in 1877, helping to form the Women's Educational Industrial Union, and she helped to aid the US troop withdrawal from Haiti in 1934 with a 600-page book on her delegation's findings under Roosevelt. He was the presiding president. And also being the first to draft the international agreement to an open Antarctica. You're gonna hopefully hear more and reconfirm this from specialist professionals in the field today. So we have an opportunity to learn about her, about a different type of feminist peace movement she led before, during, and after the 2 world wars. Let us learn today, but before we start, I want to again point out what is on the table that you could take home. You have the Baltz stamp campaign from Beverly, Massachusetts. You have the 50th anniversary event flyer with a photo. You have WILPF Peace and Freedom article about the event, internship news from Wellesley News. You have the Emily Greene Baltz bio from the Unitarians. And these are things you can take. I think there'll be enough in terms of the number of people here today. And you have Emily's own writings in Europe and peacemaking experiences. You have the Wellesley Legacy Continues. This is a really in-depth description of the commemoration event of 1996. And then you have the award ceremony speech by the chair of the Nobel Committee. And at that time, there was a very progressive Nobel Prize committee. And that was then. So now I'm very happy to jump right in because we're trying to stay on time with a fairly tight program. I'm introducing Katja Cecilia Confortini. She is a scholar and activist in behalf of feminism and peace. As a professor of the Peace and Justice Studies at Wellesley, she has done much scholarship in these topics and has been active on the ground in California's domestic violence programs. She's interned in Chiapas, Mexico, running human rights workshops advocating for California legislation of the 3 strikes law against the death penalty, and advocating in behalf of same-sex couples. She's been an elected leader in WILPF International and presently as WILPF Personnel Committee Board convener and connector with WILPF's International Secretary. Her book, published in Oxford Press in 2012, won the Titchener Book Prize, quote, Intelligent Compassion, which brings to light purpose, mission, history, and strength of this global women's organization in tracing its history and getting to know those who desired peace in the world above all else. Quote, yes. Intelligent Compassion traces changes in ideas and policies of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, the longest living international women's peace organization, over a 30-year period from 1945 to 1975, focusing on 3 areas of the organization's work, namely disarmament, decolonization, and conflict in Israel-Palestine. The book addresses the agent structure problem in international relations, specifically asking to what extent activists can transcend the practices of their era, given that they are also shaped by them. Inspired by a feminist tradition that sees activists as theorists, this book finds answers to this question in the theoretical practices of WILPF. Katja's chapter on Emily and women's international thought is a heavily researched, substantial chapter by Katja on race, gender, empire, and war in the international thought of Emily Greene Baltz, where we will have an historical and useful treat today during Women's History Month, opening a critical door to learn from our peacemaking heroine about what we can do to face the cataclysmic issues facing today's world and for each and every one of us. Welcome, Katja.
Good morning. First of all, I want to thank you, WILPF, US chapter and Boston branch in particular, Eileen, Virginia, and Ellen, that has helped me coordinate all of this and patiently called several times when I wasn't answering and I was overwhelmed. So I really appreciate it. I see that there is a very intergenerational audience today. So, and I want to point out that one of my students is here, former students, Lisa, who's now a teacher herself of a budding welfare and feminist Rue. And I really appreciate you also being here. And she's doing interesting research on feminism. And so I'm really honored that you all are here. So my name is Katja Confortini. I'm a professor at Wellesley, and I came to know Emily Greene Baltz, know her. I feel that we're related almost, while I was doing the research for my dissertation. And then I wrote the book on WILPF. And I later got a job at the college where she also taught. And it's such a great honor. I feel always like my chills running down my spine when I think about that. I walk those same paths that she walked. And so one of the things that I did, so my book, I didn't have it at home. And because there is a strike at Wellesley of non-tenure track professors for better working condition and better pay, I didn't cross the picket lines to go and pick up my book at work. And so I brought instead the book by Patricia Owens and Katarina Rizzo. This is the book where I have a chapter in on Emily Greene Baltz specifically. So if you want to take a look later. And this is where, this chapter is where I based my talk today. It's a very kind of theory dense IR kind of paper. So I hope that I will do both justice to the complexity of her thought and also not being so academic and stiff on that. But the reason I'm the reason I'm so honored also to follow her legacy, or to try to follow her legacy, because she's a big figure and she did a lot, is because I want to emphasize that she was not only an amazing scholar, but also an activist and a teacher. And those three professions really interacted in her work. She never thought of one separate from the other. And I want to show also the relevance of her work and of her thought together for today, including the way she thought about the relationship between gender, race, imperialism, and nationalism. And she continuously is a model for me. She was so determined in her thought that she was fired from Wellesley in 1919. Only to go on and win the Nobel Peace Prize. But she's not an uncomplicated figure. She's not just simply, you know, this perfect woman that we should idealize. We can also think of her as a more complex individual. I have to interject here that when she won the Nobel Peace Prize, many Americans didn't even know who she was. They were puzzled. Who is she? They really didn't know what the kind of work that she had done to win the award. And even today, relatively, she's relatively unknown, except that WILPF keeps on her legacy. Her work is important today precisely because we live in an era with US imperialist wars and racism internally. Her work speaks to us really clearly. And I want to emphasize three things that we can learn from her today. One, unlike the majority of the people in her time, Baltz saw the problems of sexism, racism, economic inequality, imperialism, abroad, and war all interrelated. This is something that WILPF still believes today. She believed that humanity should be one, both like humanity is one, there is one human race, and we should not have a system of states that persistently pursue their own interests at the expense of others. She called that the ontological unity of humanity, humanity as one, with common interests and common destiny. She was very far away from people in her time that pursued nationalism very jingoistically, just like we do today, or some of us do. Second, what we can learn from her is that she thought that the foundation to this, the foundation to a just and peaceful world was exactly this unity, and that racism at home, imperialism abroad, and war were the result of a failure of human imagination. And the ability to imagine an economic system based on needs rather than profits, and based on human well-being, but also in a cultural and structural system built around I think that I said the opposite. She believed that we needed to realize human oneness by eliminating this economic system based on profits rather than well-being. So realizing the system based on well-being rather than profit. We need to eliminate a cultural system based on notions of racial and sexual inferiority. And we need to eliminate an international system based on power-hungry states whose sole purpose is dominate other states. And then the third learning that we can gather from Baltz is that even at that time, together with many other women in WILPF and elsewhere, she believed that, as the old 1980s feminist adage says, feminism as the radical notion that women are people. And she said this ontological unity, this oneness of humanity should include women, and women have both the duty and the responsibility and the right to act in international politics. And then I want to conclude with a warning that, like I said at the beginning, we cannot idolize her, because then would make her a figure that is impossible to emulate, right? She was a human being just like all of us, with her faults and her blind spots. And so in certain of her writings, you can see that she still believes that some people were less civilized than others. And some of them even less, that there were stages of development, with some really at the top and some others at the bottom. She had some blind spots, but what she did was learning. And she learned from her WILPF sisters all the time. So what we as people can learn from her is to realize that we all have blind spots, and that our duty is to always, if we really want to realize that world that we're asking for others, is to ask ourselves where those blind spots are, and learning from the people who are more marginalized and perhaps discounted, and perhaps not counting or not considered, to open our minds to other ways of being, thinking, and acting in the world. And I think that perhaps this could be her most important lessons. So I'm going to proceed with telling you a little bit about her, and especially I want to focus on her work in Haiti. But I'll start with this. These are two pictures of her. The first one is Emily Greene Baltz at 10 years of age. And the last one is probably the last picture of her that we have in 1960. I think this might be in Cambridge, in her house. She, as a scholar activist, she really had three careers. One is when she founded a settlement house in Boston, Denison House, in the late 1890s. Second, as an academic at Wellesley College and beyond. And third, as an advocate at the League of Nations and in WILPF. And the dedication to WILPF will last her all her life, when she died, and she died at age 94 in Cambridge in 1961. Almost everything we know comes from, about her early life and late life, comes from a book by Mercedes Rendell called Improper Bostonian. And Mercedes also, and her husband, I think, also collected her work on nationalism. And these are the two books. They're still, I think you can still get them, but these I got them from the Wellesley Library. She was born on January 8th in 1867 in Jamaica Plain. This is the plaque that is outside her house, on her family house where she lived, where she was born and lived, at 130 Prince Street here. This family home is no longer standing. There's something else there, but it is on the Women's Heritage Trail. And then she died in Cambridge, like I said, at age 94. Her family was quite prosperous. Her father was a lawyer. He also was an aide to a senator. And she was part of that generation of women, first generation of women that went to colleges and prestigious colleges. Though she would later convert to Quakerism, and she's one of the famous Quakers winning the Nobel Peace Prize and celebrated by the Quakers as such, she was really heavily influenced by her Unitarian upbringing. And especially by a Unitarian minister called Charles Fletcher Dole, that and she quoted him often, saying that she wanted to dedicate herself to in the service of goodness, whatever it costs, and it did cost her. She also was a socialist for a while, but in 1916 she gave up the label socialist, and not because she didn't believe, or she became some more right-wing, but rather because she stopped believing in the power, in the role of the state as a force for good. So as she became more cosmopolitan, she started not also believing in socialism as an ideology, although she still believed in a lot of the other principles of socialism, including economic equality. Her personality and demeanors were she was kind of shy and reserved, but also she was warm and generous. she often believed her frame of reference for political thought was often elitist. She was born in a very upper class, in a kind of upper class white household, and she was definitely she referred often to white and European scholars and male scholars as well. But and also, if you read her writings, are very self-effacing, very polite and courteous, and kind of almost stripped of anger, even when she was writing about things that she was really passionate about. And in fact, in personality, she was stubborn, sometimes unwilling to compromise on principles. I very identify with that. I'm very stubborn. And in fact, eager to do the necessary unglamorous work that then that she had to do when she started being as the executive secretary of WILPF, right? So the work that you have to do, very detail-oriented, patient, and excruciating, sometimes boring work that one has to do to keep an organization going, an organization that has lasted 110 years and counting. She graduated from Bryn Mawr in 1889. She graduated in economics, but she at the time also took classes in the new discipline. At that time, it was the new discipline of sociology. She was an excellent student, excellent academic performance. When she graduated, Bryn Mawr gave her a prestigious fellowship to go and study the Sorbonne in Paris. And there she studied under this economist, Émile Levasseur, and she later authored her first book that was called Public Assistance of the Poor in France, published in 1893. I will show you there is a slide with the book. And then she completed her study at Harvard, at Radcliffe, actually, Chicago, Berlin, Germany, in German. But she never received, because she was a woman, never received a higher degree than her BA at Bryn Mawr, because Berlin University did not award doctorates to women, although she had done the work. It is very important that we remember that Baltz came of age as an intellectual and an activist in spaces that were for women. She went to a all girls high school. The settlement house that she founded in Boston, I'll talk a little bit about it later, Denison House, was also a settlement house for women. She studied at Bryn Mawr Women's College, one of the Seven Sisters. She taught at Wellesley, one of the Seven Sisters. She studied at Radcliffe, one of the Seven Sisters, now defunct. And then she went to WILPF, also the organization formed by women, and that to which she devoted her political life. So all these women's network really nurtured her to be the activist and the scholar that she was. And this is important for Rue especially, right? Rue, your sisters, women's sisters and girls, they will be the ones that inspire you, and you will be the one to inspire. And you come from a big legacy of women.
Her grandmother went to Bryn Mawr.
Oh, your grandmother went. There you go, right? And you just went to Wellesley and interviewed people at Wellesley, women at Wellesley. And Wellesley is really important. The years that she spent at Wellesley were right after she was coming back from her trip to Europe, were really important in her formation. I think that I skipped some slides. So this is Baltz as a young woman. This is at Bryn Mawr, the second picture. The third picture is her at Wellesley, and then the fourth is right after she won the Nobel Peace Prize. At a certain point in her career, in the late 1800s, she attended a summer institute sponsored by the Ethical Culture Society, and there she met Catherine Coleman, that will later hire her at Wellesley, Vida Scudder, who also was at Wellesley, and Jane Addams. And Jane Addams became her role model and helped shape her career. In 1892, modeled after Hull House in Chicago, she founded in Boston, Denison House College Settlement. And this was an initiative to bring, as she said, social and educational services into a poor immigrant neighborhood by integrating educated women, that is, college women lived here with the immigrants, with the urban poor in the living environment. So Denison House was located in the South End. I don't know that you recognize any of the streets, Elliott Street, Washington Street. I don't know that they're still there in that form. They are, right? Albany, that's where Denison House was right there, right? So Denison House provided welfare, health services, employment, vocational, academic classes, and then became also the center of labor organizing, where they linked the settlement movement with the labor movement. So the immigrant women tailors of United Garment Workers, for example, met regularly at Denison House. And Baltz, her own labor activism and her concern, especially with the rights of immigrant workers, as well as her idea of the settlement house as a model for this international community that she was envisaging, started right there at Denison and continued through her work, through her year at Wellesley. There's a side note. So her students sometimes lived at Denison House with immigrant women, right? She never lived there. So she was a little bit, you know, I don't know. I'm not, and in fact, look at her and stuff, right? So she's not perfect. None of us are. So she decided later to become a teacher at Wellesley College. She actually met Catherine Coleman again on a boat when she was returning from Germany, where she studied economics. And Catherine Coleman, who was chair of the economics department at Wellesley, said, "Why don't you come teach?" We said, "Sure." So she went, and she taught there for many years. She became chair of the Department of Economics and Sociology. They were joint at the time at Wellesley in 1913. She was an extremely beloved teacher. You can see in Mercedes Randall really recounts the stories, and there are also stories of books about Wellesley, the early years of Wellesley College, that talk about her, how she was beloved by the students. She was really good in the classroom, super committed. And even she pioneered service learning, where she was taking the students and asking them to go out and volunteer at the settlement house. And then she took them on field trips. She really pioneered active learning. And so that they could see also the reality of poor immigrant neighborhoods, sweatshops, union halls, and in general, the living conditions of the immigrant population in Boston and the poor. She taught courses like Evolution and Present Conditions of Wage Labor at Wellesley. Basically a course in labor economics that preceded by several years the first textbook on labor economics. And then in 1907, she started teaching a course on immigration. Perhaps she said that she thought that was the first course on immigration ever in the United States. Through the classes and the early work that she was doing, she was really trying to, she was learning from her experience at Settlement House and from the workers and the immigrants that she was working with and for, these people really shaped her thought and her thoughts on race at home and imperialism abroad in ways that really set her apart from contemporaries. Remember that in this time, the science, the so-called, or as she called, the pseudoscience of eugenics was really strong, and really very prominent intellectuals and labor advocates and authors and academics and historians thought, you know, race is a biological fact, and there are superior races and inferior races, and all of that is biology, and we can find it out by the shape of the skull, by the whatever, right? She didn't believe any of this shit, excuse my language. Rightly so. So anyways, while she was at Wellesley between 1904 and 1906, she took a 2-year sabbatical, one of which she unpaid, and she immersed herself in ethnographic work, going to Austria-Hungary to understand the reasons for migrations, as well as the effect of migrations on the community of origins. In the US, she went around the entire US, living in the houses of immigrants and in settlement houses. And then, it was during the field work in what was then called Bohemia and now is the Czech Republic. That's when she started to call herself a socialist. Her book, Our Slavic Fellow Citizens, that I'm not going to go that much into detail here because Gloria Macmillan is going to talk about it later, but the work was published in 1910. And this is really, it's impossible to underestimate how important this work was at the time. Because it really, first of all, how she really starts here to articulate what her thoughts about nationalism and capital accumulation and imperialism and war. But also because she's also starting thinking about immigration, right? And all those relationships. And critiquing the fear of migrants that was so prevalent at the time. And she said, nationalism is great on one sense. It's great because it brings people together, makes us believe in a common culture. We all like the unity and all of that. But it's actually bad when it becomes a very narrow sympathy of your own group versus other groups. And then it also becomes that, gives that rise to the desire to dominate others. And in that desire, there's also the disdain and rejection and fear of immigrants. If this is not something that we can learn today, I don't know what is. So Gloria will talk a lot more about this. One more thing actually is that it is here that she starts thinking about race. Because at the time, in the thinking of the time, race was not quite about color like it is now. Only in the 1920s, race starts coming, or the US start thinking of race as a color issue, right? Back in the time, it was the language, it was culture, it was clothing, and so Slavic and Italian and all, they were all like, there were hierarchies, right? The Slavic and the Italians were were a little bit better, or maybe a lot better than African Americans or Hispanic. There was hierarchies, but it was still very much all the races other than the Anglos were all inferior to the Anglos, right? So it is at this time that she starts being really involved in international politics. In 1915, she joins, this is Wellesley when she taught at Wellesley. These are those, this is a picture of her, she's the one on the left. In 1905, during a trip to Bohemia, when she starts writing Our Slavic Fellow Citizens. And then in 1915, she goes to she is in the US delegation at the International Congress of Women for Permanent Peace at The Hague, where she and Addams and other peacemakers, she's here. This is a photo that I blew up so you don't see it, but that's her here. She went with Addams and others with the delegation sponsored by the Congress she went to the Scandinavian countries and Russia to urge their governments to mediate peace during World War I. And then she wrote with Addams and Alice Hamilton, a book called Women at The Hague, the International Congress of Women and its Results. The first article then that she publishes on race, it comes out, and racial contacts comes out in 1915. And this is one of her first public writings after the war. She draws here, she draws a connection between eugenics, nationalism, imperialism, and war, sorry. And she especially critiques racially justified colonialism in Africa and Asia. Again, she calls eugenics the pseudoscience of race. And she says the pseudoscience of race, with its efforts to interpret human history in terms of the innate superiority of one racial group. And she says this pseudoscience comes directly from nationalism. The dogma, she calls it dogma of the white man's burden, veils the colony grabbing that lies behind it. The idea that nationalism is a force for good, that the US is a force for good when they go to other countries come here. Again, to me, this is very prescient, right? Very, very relevant today, which is kind of a sad thing that we're still dealing with the same issues today than she was then. The First World War then radicalizes Baltz, and she becomes more and more feminist and more radical when she joins then WILPF. She is on various radical pacifist organizations, and by radical, for me, radical is not a bad term, okay? Radical comes from the Latin word for root, so going to the root of the problem, that's what radical means for me. And she becomes very radical. She belongs to the People's Council of America. She's a publisher of Four Lights, which is a magazine coming out of the Women Peace Party, which was the US branch of a US chapter of WILPF at the time. And eventually this association with the radical peace movement costs her job at Wellesley. In 1918, the Board of Trustees voted to not give her reappointment, and at age 52, she finds herself out of a job. So she goes to work for WILPF, and this are an old picture of, it was called the Maison Internationale in Geneva, the first headquarters of WILPF, and this is the picture today. WILPF is no longer there. I will show you where WILPF is. And she joins WILPF, and their ideal that the women's rights and social justice are inextricably connected to peace. In fact, her brother, I think I have it somewhere, her brother Francis wrote to her in 1915, like holding her, and said, it was an intensely selfish thing to inject the women's suffrage issue into the peace question. And she gave him a big FU and went to work for WILPF. Here's another Heritage Trail marker. This was the first headquarters of WILPF US on 6 Byron Street, and it's also on the Women's Heritage Trail, because WILPF not only served as the international secretary of WILPF for 3 years, 1919 to 1922, but also as WILPF president, US president. So these are her 3 books: Public Assistance of the Poor in France, the first book that she wrote when after her work in France and Germany, Our Slavic Fellow Citizens, and then the third one is Occupied Haiti. And I'm going to spend, I hope I'm not too late. I know that I've maybe a little bit. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that because she writes this book as a co-author thing with 2 African-American WILPFers, Addie Hutton and Charlotte, I'm blanking. I will tell you later. I said in the 20s, that's when race for the US becomes about color. And she goes to Haiti because Haitian welfare asked, please go to Haiti and look at what the US occupation is doing. US occupied Haiti in 1915. And so she says, okay, I go, there are 5 people going, 2 African-American welfares, Emily Greene Baltz and 2 men, I think. And they do and conduct a thorough investigation of what the occupation is doing, several weeks of interviews and conversations. So she co-writes this book with these 2, Charlotte Atwood and Addie Hunton. And this book is a scathing condemnation of American occupation. There are 3 things that I want to highlight here. First of all, they said there's no such thing as benevolent rule. Just like the US didn't go to Afghanistan to benevolently liberate Afghani women, no, that's not happening. Right? Occupation is a moral evil. And not only it's a danger to the people and the democratic development of Haiti, but also it's a danger to our own democracy, because we cannot be a democracy if we occupy other people. And because the occupation rests on force and violates the principle of self-determination, it doesn't matter how many improvements in the infrastructure you do, right? It's still occupation, it's still evil, it's still military, it's still violence. And it destroys self-government and even the confidence and and the experience of Haitian people. Then she says, racism is the cause and the justification of occupation. And not only Haitians know it, some of them might also have developed some inferiority complex because of this occupation, but they know it. And it's clear that the occupiers have contempt for the Haitian people by the moment you get there. All your actions are shaped by racism, and no matter what you think you're doing, they prevent genuine cooperation. And then, this is very important, in a chapter that she co-authors with Addie Hunton, she says, there's no such thing as the predatory Black man. And this is, again, something that is very contemporary, right? The immigrants, as they ruin our women, what is they eat our dogs or whatever that weird thing that Trump said, the Black man as violent, as inherent predator. She said, there's no such thing. First of all, before occupation, white men went around Haiti without problem. But also, look at what the occupation is doing. Our soldiers are, in fact, victimizing Haitian women. There is no safety for Haitian women under military occupation. Militarized masculinity is predatory, and the existence and tolerance for forced, essentially forced prostitution, is come hand in hand. They're part of the same, it's 2 sides of the same coin with the criminalization of interracial romantic relations. So on the one hand, you rape, white soldiers rape Haitian women, but God forbid that Haitian men and women can socialize and get romantically involved with white Americans. And so, and in fact, Addie Hunton and Baltz said the mechanisms of enforcing racial segregation through the regulations of sexual relations anchored military occupation. In other words, racialized sexual relations and violence and racial segregation together are the fundamental basis, are what sustained the occupation. So what she hoped for Haitians was what they, Addie Hunton, Charlotte Atwood, and Emily Greene Baltz hoped for Haitian a mechanism to dislodge the US occupation for Haiti. But she said, since you've destroyed everything, you cannot do it immediately. You have to start talking with Haitians and figure out a way to leave and leave Haitians with something that they can build on. But you have to do it with them and not imposing your own views on them. So and she in fact critiques, she says, the United States want to have things done their way, and they are always sure that it's best, but no, they need to listen. What is our legacy, Emily Greene Baltz legacy today? Well, this is Abby Hutton, by the way, By the way, I keep forgetting to go on the slides, so I'll tell you later. Okay, this is Baltz and Hutton. This is the house of WILPF today. I think they are on the 4th floor, but there are many other organizations in Geneva there. It's really close to the UNHCR, to the United Nations refugee organization, still working for ending imperialism, racism, to promote environmental justice and peace, and is represented by the Women of Boston branch of WILPF. What today her legacy also lives in the people of WILPF. This is Ray Aitchison, who is the director of the Reaching Critical Will project of WILPF. They are in New York. They are part of the group that won WILPF the 3rd Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize, for their work with ICAN, the International Coalition to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and the work to create the Nuclear Abolition Treaty. Ray would come to Boston in a heartbeat if you invite them. They're really a fantastic speaker, and they always make that connection between racism, imperialism, and war, and even ecological destruction. And today, they are on the forefront of also denouncing what is happening in Gaza and the genocide in Gaza. And then finally, her legacy, Baltz's legacy, is present in the Peace and Justice Studies program with myself and my colleague Nadia Haj, who are the 2 faculty in the Peace and Justice Studies program at Wellesley. And we carry on her legacy in the best way we can, including, for example, today, supporting the non-tenure track faculty who are on a strike against the college leadership to claim better working condition and better pay for them. We also have, and continue to have, that started, I think, around 1995, as an Emily Greene Baltz class of 1950 scholarship for students to volunteer or do an internship during the summer, and we pay them a stipend and continue to do so. We also have a program that really wants to reach different disciplines. We cross-list our courses with a number of other departments, but also we emphasize service learning or learning in the world, and including learning as going in our communities, not only in international relations, but going in our communities to do the peace work, and including being teachers at public schools like Lisa is doing. I want to close with her words, with Emily Greene Baltz words. In her acceptance speech for the American Unitarian Association Award in 1955, she said, "The time has come to break down the dikes and let the healing waters flow over us. I see in us, young and old, the seed of the world that is to be." Thank you so much for your attention. I'm sorry if I went over my time, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yes.
Asking from the Boston branch, every time you speak, I learn and learn, and
Thank
the
you.
work and your energy for the issues that I've been working on, and you've been working on even longer.
No, I think that you beat me on this. I learned from you.
Well, we learned together.
Yes.
I have a question about the birth of our branch. It sounds like we had the first headquarters here in Boston.
Of
Could
the
that have
WILPF
been the
US,
birth of
as far
our
as I know.
branch? And what day was that?
I think 1919, when she was fired. And actually, if you go on the website, I don't have it here, but if you go on the website of the Women's Heritage Trail, you will see the first secretary of WILPF US was here. I don't remember her name now, Florence. I will tell you in a second. Women's Heritage. Yes, yes, Florence Lascombe.
What was her name?
Florence Lascombe, yes,
Yeah.
yes. But I don't know the history of the branch. I mean, I think that we could write one. I don't know where Boston branch papers are, if you kept them.
Well,
Are they
I'm
at
connecting with
Swarthmore?
Swarthmore, but I thought the headquarters here, there must have been something. Logic.
I didn't research the local branches, and I know there are people that have worked on the New York branch a lot because they published For Light. It was one of the big, but I would love to know more about the Boston branch. So maybe, yes.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. You talk about her being caught in her time, but she rose above it. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. I mean, we were all brought up believing that fossil fuels is the way to go, and even if we're fighting
Yeah.
it, we're still using it. And we believe that you know, racism is an issue, but we want to step above it. You know, I don't know what my question is, but I
Yeah.
fight this all the time. I'm studying the year 1850, trying to understand what they were seeing at that time, and how do you fight a huge population that is not waking up, and you want to wake up, but it's an enormous problem, and yet somehow she did it.
She did it and she didn't, right? Because we're still here today, doing this, fighting the same battles that she was. In my book, partly I talk about what WILPF does. And what WILPF does is really talking to everybody. And talking and listening from everybody, especially those that disagree with you, but also especially those whom society doesn't consider worthy of listening to. And then thinking, you know, having the humility to think, maybe I don't know everything, right? And it's hard. And it's hard for those of us who have profound moral convictions. I know it's really hard for me. And I always tell my students, please challenge me, please know that I am an immigrant. I'm a first generation college student. My father, and my mother, who are two of the people that I admire more in the world, are not political. My father is a 5th grade education. My mother was a nurse, but at a time where nurses could go to nursing school right after middle school, or elementary school. So and I'm the first one in my family to go to college. And I tell them, so for me, immigrants, and for a certain period of time, I hope, well, I'm not gonna say anything because it's gonna go online. I'm gonna tell you afterward.
A lot of what, to follow up in Katya's ending, when she said she wants to end with the words of Emily Greene Baltz. Our next the video that you see will be 23 minutes of her words. People of the whole anniversary celebration was reading from the improper Bostonian. And after that, we will hear 5 minutes from the Boston Heritage Trail to tell us about that. And you can sign up. We hope to get a tour. And so before people leave, please sign up. But right now, we'll move ahead with the video.
We must hear the voices and have the dreams of those who came before us. And we must keep them with us in a very real sense. This will keep us centered. This will help us maintain our understanding of the job that we must do.
It's a great pleasure for us to have this event in honor of Emily Greene Baltz, who in some way we would like to claim as the founding ancestress of the Peace and Justice Studies program here.
Emily was at home on this planet and in all cultures. When only 14, she was a feminist.
If I ever live and grow up, my one aim and concentrated purpose shall be and is to show that women can learn, can reason, can compete with man in the grand fields of literature and science and conjecture that opened before the 19th century. That a woman can be a woman and a true one without having all her time engrossed by dress and society.
She was taken into Bryn Mawr, which was a great honor for young women in her day. Her brilliance became noted and she was awarded thusly.
Emily Greene Baltz entered college 3 years ago with advanced standing. She is 22 years of age, a woman of unusual ability, of extraordinary beauty, of moral character, of great discretion and balance of judgment, very unselfish and in every way fit to be a representative of the college and to engage in study in Europe.
In this Victorian age, when modern youngsters imagine us to have been so chaperoned and hedged in, I went, a girl of 23, who knew nothing of the world, had never come out in society or acquired any human experience, to enjoy complete independence. As a woman student, I was something of a curiosity, and I found no appropriate courses available, though I followed some evening lectures, which took me alone across the city to come home by a lonely street in the Etoile quarter at 11 o'clock at night.
Emily's father urged her to go to Berlin to study and plunge into German culture. Here her interest in the larger world escalated in Europe's social upheavals and revolutions. She attended meetings of the International Socialists and labor unions.
I returned home from Germany on the same ship with Miss Catherine Komen. She was then teaching economics single-handedly at Wellesley College. She offered me an opportunity to teach there. A half-time position which would be devoted mainly to reading student papers, though by the second semester I was teaching a class. I saw that after being supported by my father till almost 30, it was time that I had ceased to be an expense to him. In any case, it was a godsend when the opportunities for a woman to teach economics were rare indeed.
First-hand learning was deeply imprinted in Emily's methodology. She became an American innovator in the field.
True to her desire to give her students a chance to check their impressions derived from books by direct contact with reality, she took small groups of students to institutions for paupers and for the feeble-minded, to reform schools and prisons. The college, in marked contrast to the present, received letters from irate parents protesting against having their daughters taken to investigate brothels.
In 1904 and 1905, she traveled around the U.S. to investigate the conditions in which Slavic peoples lived and went to immigrant routes in Europe. She stayed among squalor and misery for over a year to understand immigrants' needs and culture. As a result, she wrote prolifically on the subject and helped to develop the famous Women's Trade Union League.
This was a period of increasing nativism in the United States, increasing opposition to immigration, and a good deal of hostility, particularly to Slavic peoples and Eastern European peoples, which ended up in restriction of immigration for the first time in 1924. So she was very much engaged in a major struggle against the nativistic movements in the U.S.
Emily calls herself a socialist.
On December 31st, 1906, after her return from her Slavic journey, Emily wrote in her journal, "Within the year, I have decided to call myself a socialist and accepted appointment at Wellesley only on condition of the president knowing this. It will lead to some misunderstanding, of course, but I hope to some better understanding, too."
Here was a woman whose activism and academic scholarship formed a seamless garment which she wore so powerfully in the classroom, in local communities and on the international stage. It was her commitment to integrating these two parts of herself that eventually led her and this college through powerful, exciting times and also to an early point of crisis.
Emily contributed greatly at the Hague Congress to prevent World War I.
For one brief accidental period of my life, she later wrote, I consulted with men in the seats of power. We talked with prime ministers and foreign ministers in St. Petersburg and Copenhagen and Christiania and Stockholm and The Hague and London. In Washington, I had an interview with Woodrow Wilson, whom I had just missed the privilege of having as a teacher in law. Wilson was very nice and talked with me about an hour. He said definitely that he would not wait to be asked to mediate. If he saw any opportunity to be of use, he would take it. This was a comfort, as I had feared that he really meant to stand aside.
Emily was very active in the Women's Peace Party, where she raised funds to prevent war.
I have never lived through such a vivid and buoyant emotional experience. The work was exacting and exhausting, yet one never felt tired. The presidential campaign in the autumn of 1916, with its slogan, "He kept us out of war," brought many wishful peace votes for Woodrow Wilson.
But at the advent of a world war, congressmen refused to vote their constituents' wishes or their consciences.
A Minnesota delegate reported that several congressmen knew their constituents were opposed to war, that they themselves knew no reason why the country should enter the war, but felt that patriotism demanded that they should vote for war.
Those against the war were spurned and detested, but Emily continued to explain her full views.
The war years brought pain. It is a hard thing to stand against the surge of war feeling, against the endless reiterated suggestion of every printed word, of the carefully edited news, of posters, parades, songs, speeches, sermons. I do not know whether what held me should be called a religious faith or an irresistible set of the inner self or fanaticism. My support and my belief that one must not resort to war for any purpose came largely from friends whom I revered and who felt as I did. Conscientious objectors, too, whose sufferings for their convictions in England and here were known to us, shamed me and encouraged me. So did the courage of men like Bertrand Russell and Romain Rolland.
In 1918, after several years of unpaid leave to go about her work against the war and for a permanent peace, Emily Greene Baltz returned to find out that the trustees of this college had narrowly voted, and over the objection of the president and much of the faculty, not to renew her contract after 22 years of devoted teaching.
Emily used to make a cause célèbre out of the affair.
One of the casualties of war that is rarely spoken of is that of men and women of peace who become identified as disloyal and unpatriotic for their commitment to a peaceful world. Certainly the story does not end there. Emily Greene Baltz maintained a strong relationship with many in the Wellesley College community and resided in this town. The college later embraced this distinguished daughter formally.
The ravages of war required great sacrifice and tenacity.
For the first time, Emily Baltz and the other American women had the experience of meeting the alien enemy face to face. Those who came to Zurich from the countries which had been spared the worst ravages of the war, wrote Emily Baltz, were aghast at the evidence of bodily suffering from famine and cold in the faces of their friends, and realized how little even this suggested of the desolation and disruption caused by the war.
Women's International League for Peace and Freedom was born and an international office established.
The women of Zurich adopted the name Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Freedom they made coordinate with peace for several reasons. Only in freedom is permanent peace possible, one of the delegates said. The Congress was filled with a sense of the tragic, the incalculable importance of people of every point of view coming to understand the insanity of endeavoring to solve social and economic problems by violence, whether violent suppression in the name of law and property or violent insurrection in the name of liberty. On the last day, the Congress adopted a simple constitution and unanimously elected Jane Addams as international president. Emily Greene Baltz, having become unexpectedly free, was chosen as international secretary-treasurer. The international office was to be located wherever the League of Nations was to establish its seat. So it came about that Emily Baltz entered upon a new career and was to spend a good part of the next dozen years or so at Geneva.
Serving with WIL, she also helped the League of Nations. She appreciated every aspect of the Geneva office.
During the 3 years I served in Geneva, I had the most interesting opportunity to see the development of the League of Nations in its earlier and more idealistic phase, before power politics had sensed its importance and sought to use it for their own purposes. In other respects, these first post-war years were painful and disappointing, confused and disheartening to the last degree. There was, however, great exhilaration in the sense of active and organized comradeship with women working for peace all over the world, in acting as a receiving and transmitting station of our round-the-world fellowship. I remember one day when an American woman wrote me that when she was young, she had devoted herself to abolishing slavery in the United States, that this one, she had worked for women's suffrage, and that this now being won also, she was giving herself to the cause of peace, which is not yet won, and which cannot be won so easily as the other two. Throughout the history, the WILPF continued to be open to peace-minded women of very different shades of opinion, from those who oppose war under all circumstances to those willing to work in any effective way to bring about a peaceful world. The trend toward absolute pacifism was stronger in some national sections than in others. In the United States, a large and remarkable group of Pennsylvania Quaker pacifists impressed themselves deeply upon a great many of the members. Emily Baltz believed that the program of the WILPF was so inclusive that there was not only room for, but need of, different groups to emphasize different parts of it. Some want to work for a League of Nations, and some for suffrage, and some for Tolstoyan pacifism, and some for social justice and brotherhood and sisterhood, I'm adding. Surely this is all to the good.
Always with good cheer.
Wait till spring comes, and the mountains are hung high in the sky, and the primroses are yellow splashes under orchard trees, and the merles begin to sing. Winter may hold on even late, but the sun wakes from its long autumn swoon, and the everlasting gray veil overhead melts away.
Fascism arises in Europe.
The rising tide of fascism made itself felt in some degree even in Switzerland, Holland, Sweden, and England. Even in America, the concepts of peace and freedom had drifted under ideological clouds and took color from the creeds of the waxing dictatorships. As early as 1927, Emily had written, how many Americans not only believe, but openly maintain that fascism is better than democracy, that unthinking of idioms is better than action based on individual conscience and thought, that patriotism is synonymous with nationalism, that liberty is dangerous, that peace is a dream, and not even a beautiful dream.
Mrs. Baltz's pacifism was very practical and not absolute, recognizing that a lasting peace would not be found without economic and political freedom. She opposed the Spanish-American War. She opposed World War I, seeing it as a power play among old empires, despite the popular view that this would be the war to end all wars. Later, she saw Hitler's regime as being of a different nature, and she did not condemn World War II.
Her value as a world citizen was known.
Though she never held any high public office and made her contributions largely outside government agencies, she managed by her tireless work of writing, travel, organization, and more uniquely, by effective and continued letter writing, to achieve a wide hearing and influence.
She was 80 at the time that she was going to go over to the Nobel Peace Prize, and I was unemployed at the time, and I thought, well, she's 80, somebody has to go with her. So I soon found out that I was entirely unnecessary. All I did was steer her in the right direction in the hotel corridors. And between the two of us, my diary says we lost 6 umbrellas. But the trip, of course, was absolutely marvelous. Everywhere we met, we were met by groups of women with bouquets of flowers, and everywhere we were entertained, wined, and dined. In Oslo, where the ceremony of giving her the prize, we had an audience with the King of Norway. And he and my aunt just sat there and chatted like old friends, perfectly happy, as they had met during her journeyings during World War I. And that's the sort of person she was, just very vital and full of humor and life and utterly absorbed in her ideals and her work and not caring a bit about details. Okay.
The education of the mind has meaning only inasmuch as it leads to meaningful action in the world. Emily Greene Baltz stands in a long line of academics, activists, peacemakers, contemplatives, and others whose lives continue to challenge those in education to become relevant to the world of which it purports to be so knowledgeable.
Many of the challenges and issues and the problems that Emily and Jane Addams were dealing with in 1915, the women in the Women's International League today are still dealing with. We are still struggling with. The program of the International Organization in 1915 is not different from the program in 1981, 1996, 81 years later. We are still, the top of our list is disarmament, ending U.S. intervention in other countries, struggling against racism, and looking at what women's rights really means in the context of this culture that we live in.
At the annual meeting, May 7, 1949, she said, and I quote, "The hardest thing of all is left, the conquest not of time and space, but of ourselves, of our stupidity and our inertia, of our greediness and touchiness, of our fear and intolerant dogmatism."
Emily Greene Baltz spoke to her generation then, as she speaks to ours now, of a vision and a strategy. The vision is of a world in which life-giving rather than death-dealing is that around which our society might revolve. A vision of a human community in which interdependence overcomes ignorance, and in which sisterhood replaces the sins of selfishness, greed, and the lust for power. And her strategy, to be a pacifist, a commitment to being in the world as a force of love and life, rather than as an agent of death.
To make it plain, Historical Society over the past year has sought various ways of commemorating Emily Greene Baltz's life. After Emily's sister Mady died in 1961, the Baltz family home was demolished for development. Earlier this year, a historical plaque that was sponsored by the Society and the Bostonian Society was erected at the family home site.
I represent the Boston Women's Heritage Trail. We developed a trail of women's history about 6 years ago because, I'm sorry to tell you, there's no women on the Boston Freedom Trail and there's only one woman on the Black Heritage Trail. And we are 50% of the world, so we developed a trail based on women's history in downtown Boston. Emily Baltz is honored on our trail at 6 Byron Street, which is on Beacon Hill, which was the WILPF headquarters when Emily was the national president of WILPF.
Because how can we be as courageous and tenacious and single-minded and effective as this extraordinary woman was? And of course, we can't. Few of us, I think, can hope to make the kind of contributions that she made in her life. And the story, the comment by her niece that she was absorbed in her ideals and her work and not caring a bit about details is something I think we'll all take away. I don't think she'd want us to be worried about the detail of whether we're able to do it quite the way she did it. I think she'd want us just to be absorbed in our ideals and in our work. And so we should all go forward and do that. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming.
And it's very exciting to have someone who represents the Heritage Trail, the Boston Women's Heritage Trail, because you got to see a lot of what they do. Now we have Alexandra Russell. Thank you so much for being here, Alexandra.
My name is Alexandra Russell. I am the new executive director for the Boston Women's Heritage Trail, and I'm thrilled to be here today. I feel so uplifted and empowered by this history that we're learning and just being in community with everybody today. I have my PhD in history and I have publications, but what I enjoy the most is public history. I enjoy tours. I enjoy educating the public about things in our community. And that's really the ethos of the Boston Women's Heritage Trail. You know, what is the history that surrounds us? I think, you know, for me, it would be nice if Emily Greene Baltz had a much more national presence, but perhaps more meaningful is that her legacy is heralded by us here today, by Wellesley, by the Boston Women's Heritage Trail. And I think just keeping her memory alive and living her legacy of peace and freedom and activism is really a fitting memorial to her every single day. So I do want to encourage you to go to our website, the bostonwomen'sheritagetrail.org. And as you saw, Mary Smoyer has been instrumental in having her celebrated on the trail on 2 of our tours, one here in Jamaica Plain at the site of her home and one in the Back Bay at the headquarters of WILPF on 6 Byron Street. So I'm here for any questions. We have some flyers in the back. Thank you so much, Ellen, for having us here today. And thank you all for being a part of celebrating her legacy.
Personally, feel it's an honor to be introducing our next speaker and presenter, Gloria McMillan. I first became aware of Gloria's talents in our WILPF Disarm Issue Committee when the Russians invaded Ukraine a few years ago. She skillfully introduced us to the Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs influencing the war and their connections with the US. And last year, I learned of her determination to again start a WILPF branch in Chicago. The Hull House, Jane Addams connection being very strong there. It took years, 3 years, in fact, of trial and error, and the branch opened solidly this past January. Last month, Gloria used her skill to get into news one of the military trainings of US missiles being launched from Vandenberg Space Force Base in Santa Barbara, California, to the Marshall Islands. This has been going on for a while. This has been going on, in fact, for years. Usually the unarmed missiles are shot off early in the AM, 1, 2, 3 in the morning. So anyone attending and recording are really good activists like Wilford McGregor Eddy. And they are dedicated to stopping these trainings. These missiles can be armed with nuclear weapons, and that's the concern. Getting info like this out now is very difficult because most news media is controlled by billionaires. And Gloria finds ways to get media out in these challenging times. Now, for this presentation on Emily Greene Baltz and Jane Addams, I learned the key, the real key to Gloria's life and work. What a privilege. She says it all stems back to her growing up in multilingual, cosmopolitan East Chicago, Indiana. Gloria's early degrees were in Indiana. Then she obtained her PhD at the University of Arizona in rhetoric, composition, English Lit, language studies, and focused her dissertation on Chicago immigrant women writers from 1890 to 1940. And by the way, she won the Florence Henley Snyder Dissertation Award for this. I need to point out also that Emily Greene Baltz did a project on Slavic people in the East and Central Europe area and compared them to life in the United States that covered the same period of time of Gloria's dissertation. And that's why she's on our panel here. And Baltz based her work in Haiti on findings from field work on Slavic speakers. Multilingual Baltz, with her project and book, Our Slavic Fellow Citizens, helped the US and Jane Addams and her Hull House settlement to better understand this group of immigrants. At the time, many established Americans in the nativist movement, which was mentioned in the video, disparaged Slavic speakers' intelligence and their urban housing conditions because they didn't understand Slavic languages and the causes of urban crowding, and did not know the Slavic-speaking immigrants' rich and very interesting culture. Today, you're being gifted with only 1/3 of an ongoing project that Gloria McMillan is doing on Emily Baltz's Slavic citizens. And we believe this is the first of its kind. Now it's time to hear from Gloria, first from her video, and follow up with her from Zoom. She's in Tucson, Arizona.
Okay, so hello, I am your tour guide to the past, Gloria McMillan. I want to thank the hosts that are having this event, the Boston branch of WILPF, especially Eileen Kurkowski and Ellen Mass, among the others there, for inviting me to this event. Thank you. And thanks to Professor Katia Confortini for her engaging talk. And now this is the past. Here we have two women, two exciting women, Jane Addams, who won her Nobel in 1930, and Emily Greene Baltz, who won hers in 1946. So let's start with their journeys. What made them the women that they were? Let's start with Jane Addams because she was the earlier of the two by 7 years. And she was very connected to her family, especially her father, because her mother had died when she was 2 years old. I believe she was born in 1860, so around during the Civil War, her mother died. Her father lived on, John Addams, and she idolized her father. He was an upstanding member of, was a senator, I think, at one point, very upstanding man, very moral, very ethical. And he made her question everything. But he didn't like her to go so far away to the new Smith College. It was very new then. So he said, why don't you stay home? Go to Rockford, Illinois, and attend the female seminary. So she did. She was a brilliant scholar at the Rockford Female Seminary, and she was at the head of her class in the junior year. And in those days, believe it or not, they gave an oration in Greek. So she picked the hero Bellerophon, likening his heroic victory over the chimera to the winged idealism she felt that could correct and conquer social wrongs. So already she was changing from a mortal enemy, someone you would kill, to some bad thing that you would overcome. And I'm really sorry to say that this Greek oration is not preserved, and it's really too bad. Well, a couple years after her father died, she had an inheritance that would amount to $11 million in today's money. So, like all the women who were that wealthy, it was no problem. She could take the grand tour of Europe. And she was grieving very badly for her father, and she thought this would help. But being Jane Addams, she had read Charles Dickens, George Eliot, and even, I don't know if William T. Stead was around yet, but she read people like that. In Bleak House, Dickens had proposed a character named Mrs. Jellyby, who was so concerned with a remote island in Asia or somewhere that she ignored her own children. They were running wild around London, and she never saw, she would ride in a carriage past them, but she never saw East London, where people were so poor they were fighting over half-rotten cabbages. This is all depicted in Jane Addams' memoir, 20 Years at Hull House. So Jane Addams made a point to go there. She went to East London. She went to these places. She saw the Toynbee Hall, which was the premier first settlement house, where young men from Oxford who had social consciences were going to teach classes to these very poor people in East London. And this inspired Jane. She went back to her Greek history, and she was thinking, I can be a hero like this, and I can conquer these kinds of ills in society, the urban poverty. She went back to Chicago and she started Hull House. She moved into an old mansion that was deserted at that point, built by one Mr. Hull. Before she did that, though, she stopped in Greece and went to Athens. This is where people were going to see these bleached out statues, the Acropolis, and various other ruins, and they were ignoring the living people because they were dark. They looked very dark. they didn't look like Northern Europeans. They were sort of a mix between Mediterranean and maybe in some cases looked North African. So they didn't know what to do with these people, the people that had gone on these grand tours. This is what we now call Orientalism. It doesn't start in Asia. It starts in the Balkans, which is where we will be talking about some of the countries in the Balkans. People who are different. It begins in the Balkans. It begins when you get past Vienna. And then as you go south, Italy and Greece. It's an Orientalist view of these cultures. It's a distorted, westernized concoction that isn't quite in line with what actually was there. Noticing around her that all these Greeks, the kind that people weren't noticing in Greece, who were on the grand tour, she decided she would bridge that gulf. Jane Addams thought, well, I could have them do plays in their own languages here at Hull House. She started the Little Theater at Hull House, and they did plays. They did Antigone, Ajax, the Trojan Women. I don't know if they ever did Lysistrata. It might have been too racy for those people, but she did a number of Greek plays. And she didn't have actors from the colleges. She had the local people who were the fruit sellers, the little men on the street corner hawking vegetables, but they were Greek and they could speak Greek, so they did the plays right there at Hull House. Jane Addams would invite people from Winnetka, from Evanston, way up on the north side, who had money, and they would come because they had gone to Harvard and Yale, and they knew this is classical education. These Greek people from her neighborhood had a connection to that. And so Jane Addams wrote about it quite often, and when she lectured at places like Northwestern University, she would say things like this, that you can't take their cultures away from these people. It's their loyalty to their parents and their little traditions. So we should not take all this away, we should add to it. And she even went so far as to say that children had not been properly taught if they never connect the people of today with these classics, if they never connect Julius Caesar to the Italians out selling vegetables or having little dining, little restaurants right in their neighborhood. They're connected to these people. So she favored a pluralistic society, and that's what she argued for all her life. Meanwhile, her younger friend, Emily Greene Baltz, was watching how Jane Addams diffused the nativist claims that these new immigrants from the Slavic countries and those Greeks and Italians, they're not like us. And she thought, well, okay, maybe I can do something like that too. She had an idea for humanizing the Slavic immigrants. They were being much picked upon in the press. So Emily Baltz had a post at Wellesley, and she taught economics. She knew that they would not welcome the Slavs. They couldn't make those same exceptions for them that they might make for the Greeks or even the Italians. Opinion was very much against Slavic immigrants at that time. So Baltz took a long field trip in 1906, and it resulted in our Slavic fellow citizens book. Here's what her grand tour looked like. I think she'd taken another one in Western Europe in the 80s, but this is the one that she took in 1906. She started in Vienna after traveling across Europe, and she began a sort of a circuit around Bohemia, Slovakia, Transylvania, other parts of Hungary, Ruthenia, Galicia, Poland, Slovenia, Croatia, various places. Her first stop, which was very close to Austria, was Bohemia. Chapter 5. And here's the Czech Republic of today, which is the Bohemia of that period. Prague is in the center almost of the photo. Down below it, you see south, and a little bit to the east is Vienna. So actually, Prague is west of Vienna. It's not in Eastern Europe. And most people today would visit Prague, and they would see all these beautiful castles, the Progeny Palace, the Teen Church, the oldest working astronomical clock. Well, that isn't what Emily did, not that Bohemia. She went to the factories and farms, and she visited the people out in the countryside. I wish I had enough time to give justice to all of her quotes, very detailed, rich ethnographic descriptions of villages and costumes, but you'll just get a taste of it. First of all, she said they were very old immigrants, the Bohemians, because they were right in mixed with the Germans. They were already here in large numbers by the 1850s, along with the Germans who came in 1848 because there had been a civil uprising for more rights. And they came at the same time. They came with their families. They didn't come alone. The Croatian men often came alone in order to return with money back to Croatia. But the Bohemians came as families. They had very low illiteracy. They were a little bit even par with the Germans. They only had about 3% illiteracy. And Baltz visited one of these Bohemian villages. The woman who was hosting her had a daughter who looked fairly dowdy in the old picture she had from when the girl was growing up at home. And she told Emily Greene Baltz, look, she's so more refined and intelligent now that she lives in the United States. Well, this was not what Emily had viewed. She saw many people who looked very coarse, very poor, very raggedy in the United States. So she says it more elegantly. And she also, Baltz did not approve their accent in English because most of these people had not spoken to the most elevated groups in the United States. They had spoken to other poor people. But one thing she did notice was that they were very warm and friendly. So right in the beginning of the book, Baltz makes fun of the whole nativist movement, very broad fun. And she has this woman in a Bohemian costume who's really an American from a Midwestern college, and then labels it as a joke, Slav invader, although some people consider women invaders too. And I have Jane Addams saying, well, that's a good one. And here's on your quote, that was also good, your epigraph, where you say, über den Bergen sind auch Leute. Over the mountains, there are also people, because the Czech Republic of today, the Bohemia of then, was the fault line. It was the San Andreas Fault between the Germans and the Czechs. They were all totally intermarried, just incredibly intermarried, but they couldn't stand each other at times, and it was because of the linguistic differences and other things. But they were intermixed. So she was making that point by putting it in German. Über den Bergen sind auch Leute. They're also people, hey, across the mountains there. Next, in the next chapter, she takes us to Slovakia, chapter 6. That's the part right there to the east of the Czech Republic and to the west of Ukraine. You see Ukraine way off in the east there. When Baltz visited and stayed in a Slovak village, she just loved the way the women were the painters. They would take these plain whitewashed walls and they would cover them with murals and folk designs. And she talks about it. Again, I don't have time to go into anything like the depth, but she was fascinated by them. She said similar things. She loved the Slovak local costumes, and she said because each kerchief may look carelessly arranged, but it's folded and pleated in a precise way that tell you which village that is. So she said this gives them a sense of local village identity. Going on to the causes of immigration, she said that because agriculture is their main job and their plots are way too small, they have to go somewhere else, whether that be Germany or France or over to the United States. And their little crafts were dying. The things that they would augment their salaries from farming were making ceramic pots and hammering tin objects, wire making. One of the things the Slovaks did very well was wire making, and they did take these crafts to the United States. Now we still have chain link fences that otherwise hurricane fences, and they're still around. So when they took some machines and mechanized their wire making, that did very well for some of the Slovaks when they came to the United States. And she lists other crafts that were dying out due to modern trade patterns, mechanization, and greater roads were being improved so people could travel farther with their produce. The next place that she went to was coastal Croatia. That's chapter 8. You can see Zagreb. In those days, it was called Agram during the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Agram, now Zagreb. And Baltz visited a Croatian village and saw traveling players. They had a relatively high illiteracy rate because, again, they were being conscripted into the army. More on that later. So they had maybe 35–40% illiteracy, somewhere in close to in between there. But she was amazed. They made up for it. They had ways to work around that because there were always a few peasants in the village who could read. And they had peddlers who traveled from village to village with newspapers and books. Dickens, Goethe, Victor Hugo, Tolstoy. And they would sit up at night, and the few people who could read would read to them in the winter. They couldn't do it in summer because of farming. Many of the villages, in fact, had theater. They had these little traveling player groups that would go around from village to village, a little picture of them on the left side here. And they would produce grandiose historical dramas on a very makeshift stage. And she makes fun of the surroundings were so funny, but she said that overall the acting was so good. And she said, I rarely have been stirred in this way except by Booth. We all know who Booth was. Not John Wilkes Booth, that was a relative, Edwin Booth. Edwin Booth was one of the most famous actors in the United States at that time. And he came from this very illustrious family of actors. So when she's talking about immigration, Baltz was citing intemperance and drunkenness for reasons, because you couldn't collect capital, you couldn't accumulate if you were going to be drunk all the time. So she did say they were a bit different than our drunks, but also industry was hampered. It was really held back by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, making Croatia into a barrack state where they were conscripting all the young men, much more than in other provinces. And that depressed their trade. They didn't have enough young people to do the trade. The other thing was they couldn't grow grains. They had kind of a rocky soil in many places of Croatia. So they could grow vineyards. They could grow wine grapes. So when their vineyards failed, then they also emigrated. And again, they had the ship barkers coming and saying that sail to the US. Next, we come to the borderlands, Poland and the borderlands of Galicia. This was a big part, the major part of Poland where people at that time were immigrating from was Galicia, Austrian-Polish borderland. It's in 3 countries or more, Poland, Slovakia, Romania, and Ukraine. There were these people called Ruthenians who were sort of in that very end part of Slovakia. When Baltz visited the Austrian-Polish Galician villages, she found a very high illiteracy rate, about 40%, with Poles in general being less illiterate and having more literacy at 31%. But she said intelligence is growing, and even though the standard of living is low, she met all kinds of housing arrangements, good, bad, and indifferent. And one Ruthenian one was very nice that she stayed in. She approved of that. She described it, gave great ethnographic description. Every country she visited, she talked about their village dances. And she found the ones in Galicia very entertaining, and that the women really dressed up at these village dances. Again, she noted that the returning Galician immigrants had a coarse speech from contact with working class people. They learned their English from those who only half knew English, and they were urban people, workers. They weren't the most polished English speakers. However, the Slovaks had a very high opinion of African Americans for teaching them the best English. And they also cited their high opinion was that they were generous. One of the African Americans had helped somebody learn how to use a sewing machine. As in Slovakia, excuse me, the Polish government is trying to stop immigration. The churches were preaching against immigration because it was depleting the available labor pool in these villages. But they were not able to compete with some of the other areas, as you can see here. One of the complaints that the Galician people had was that American capitalists were producing petroleum and that it didn't ever trickle down to benefit the people there. So they had that complaint. The Poles had the Catholic religion, and that gave them a lot of solace that allied with their nationality. But in Galicia, they were up against others. They were against Uniate religion or Ukrainian Orthodox religion, sometimes Romanian Orthodox, Catholics in Hungary. So when they were in this very mixed area, sometimes there would be friction, and immigration would come from Poland because they didn't want to stay in these very tense areas of territories contending over their borders. One of the other reasons for immigration was that the subdividing of land was driving immigration. Women from Galicia were immigrating to become servants. There were government decrees coming in to take away the pub and hostelry trade from some of the Jewish owners. And the Jewish people were restricted in many areas. They could only do certain trades. So this was some of their main trades, and they would immigrate because they could no longer be pub owners or hostel owners there in Galicia. The farming part of the Galician population liked the Midwest and Canada because they saw that these were bigger plots than what they could get. Finally, the last place that I have time to describe and that she went to was Slovenia, a very much smaller area. You can see Slovenia up on the map, capital Ljubljana. It has a population of 1.5 million in those days, very small compared to some of the other groups. And they didn't have a literature. They didn't have a literary language. What people were speaking were what peasants spoke at home, songs, tales that were the tales of the people, but no written, published literature, and no pulsating tradition. She said even the enthusiasm wasn't there. They were becoming part of the Austrian Tyrolean culture, and a lot of their culture was just being absorbed, and it wasn't there. So when she was in Cleveland, they were called Greiners. It was a nickname for Carniolans or Corinthians, these Slovenians. They're closely related, but not identical with the Croatians, and they're much more mountain people. They were not centrally governed. There's a picture of a couple of these Slovenian girls in their costumes, and even the costumes were disappearing. They were taking on the Austrian costumes or just general Western. The literacy rate was 75%. The villages were more attractive because up in the mountains, they were in some cases indistinguishable from Austrian villages in terms of their decor and their style of building. But the jobs were. So several places in the book, Emily Greene Baltz would like you to know that she was citing Jane Addams' immigrant friend, Josefa Humpel-Zeman, especially about the Bohemian people, but probably about some of the others. We're now back to 2025. We still have those wonderful books, Our Slavic Fellow Citizens by the scholar Emily Greene Baltz, and Hull House Maps and Papers by Jane Addams and actually by all the residents of Hull House together. And Josefa Humpel-Zeman had one of the chapters in Hull House Maps and Papers. She was the only woman immigrant being allowed to write one of these chapters. So I'm sure both of these illustrious women, these Nobel Peace Prize winners, would like you not only to hear about them, hear their names, they would like you to take the time and read their books. We hope that you will, and we wish you a happy celebration of Emily Greene Baltz and her friend Jane Addams, and have a good day. Happy reading.
My question for Gloria is, did Baltz or maybe Jane Addams to go back to their Slavic locations where they wrote the book after World War I? Because World War I, I mean, we still wonder why did that war happen, but the Austro-Hungarian Empire was you know, a very conflicted area to be in. And I think many of those towns and countries suffered a great deal in the, you know, 17 to 19. So did they go back to talk to the people that they had originally interviewed?
Well, I've read about, can you hear me, Robin?
Yep.
Okay, I've read that, and it was mentioned in one of the videos, I think it was Ellen Mass's video, that there was a second trip of those women at The Hague in 1919. And they went, but it sounded like they limited to Scandinavia and Russia. I'll have to go back and do more on that. I didn't get that they went down into the whole, you know, Austro-Hungarian parts of Europe.
But I think that meeting took place in Vienna, didn't it? The 19...
Yes, but they took trips afterwards, just as they did in the earlier one in 1915. They did the same thing. They fanned out, but they went northwards, it sounds like, toward Scandinavia and into Russia to try. Russia was in the worst shape. It was having a huge civil war, and it was a huge place. So I think maybe that was what was in their thinking, that these other places are having a hard time, but Russia's where we're going to try to see what's going on.
Okay, well, thank you.
And I thank everyone. I think, you know, people may think this is all very archaic stuff, but there have been only a few stereotypes in US culture. There is no coherent history of Slavic people in this culture that gets in the media. And this year's Best Picture Academy Award went to Anora, which certainly it furthers that bimbo image of the Slavic woman. So it horrified a lot of us that won the Best Picture Award for all the claims and rationalizations of how sympathetic and vulnerable the young woman was. There is a certain, you can call it the bimbo syndrome that remains about Eastern European women, and especially Russian women. So it's what my point is, it's not all historical.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Oh, yes. I was wondering if there's any information about how Emily Greene Baltz reacted to both her getting the Nobel Prize and Jane Addams. Did she have any reflections on that and what it meant that the two of them got these prizes?
Well, for one thing, if you notice, I want to make a point of this. My talk was about the immigrant side of the conversation. I don't think that's been adequately noted. And so while the rest of this program is about what Baltz thought and in her life, I stuck with her words in the book, but they were words about the immigrants. And I want to make a real point that this talk was about the immigrant side of the conversation. So I would refer that question to Katya, maybe she knows.
Then I do have another question of were the immigrants, what race are they considered? Katya brought up that issue about race, and what did Emily have any thoughts about race and their
Have you heard the German term Untermenschen?
Yes.
Untermenschen. Basically, you start where it's the San Andreas Fault, basically there, the German and Czech areas of the Sudetenland and Vienna. Once you go past that into other languages, it's a different issue between Italians as you go south. But when I'm talking east and west, once you go east, then we're in Untermenschen country. And all these attitudes have not totally died out, but you know, it's now we have the big issue is color. But Untermenschen, you can look that term up, anyone who's not too familiar with it, and see what that term has done and the attitudes about Balkan people. I heard in Paris that women would scream out at their husbands, Balkan. You know, it was an insult term in Paris. So there's a sliding scale.
but there is a dividing line there. It remains.
Ellen, has a question, Ellen Mass?
Sure, Ellen, go with it.
I'm just thinking that what you're telling us about the peoples of the Eastern European, the Balkans, Slovakia, or Slovenia, that it's must be much more relevant in today than we realize, because you're giving us the underneath culture of these people and their anthropological histories. It's not being done, but it should be, because we've got major war in Europe now around that same area. And I've not, maybe it's just my lack of reading. There must be something.
No, Ellen, it's not your lack of reading. There's been an unconscious aversion to learning anything, because it's much easier to keep these goggles in place of Untermenschen than to actually learn and diffuse some of the ignorance. That has been not a conscious, not an official policy where they put notices out on TV, don't learn anything about these countries. It's just ongoing, and it's never been deconstructed. That's the word I'm looking for. So
you might be the person to take this on. Or
I have a friend in Tucson. She's from one of the Eastern European countries, and she always kind of giggles or chuckles like, "Yo, go for it, Gloria." She doesn't see it doing much, but I said it before I die, I'm going to try, because it relates directly to the work in Haiti. And this attitude is just a different facet of the same ugly kind of thought misapplied to African Americans and Untermenschen. So there you go. Same thing, different target. And that's pretty much, I was happy to do it. Oh, and I'll just say fast, I'm sorry for all the Hungarians, Romanians, and others who are Eastern Europeans, because she didn't have time to include them and wanted to keep it on the Slavs. But in my cultural video, it's going to be in 2 parts. I do include the Hungarians and others. So it's not just going to be Slavic. It's all the different peoples.
Have to have a special event for that.
I want to thank you, Gloria, for this excellent preview of coming attractions. That you say you might be finished with this by the end of the year, and I know you're a hard worker, and it probably will be finished by December. But being from Slavic background, I have been captivated by this and the book on Slavic citizens. It is well written, sometimes too many facts, but very interesting.
Robin has
one other thing about Emily Greene Walsh, and again, I think we're still living in 19th century misconceptions, which she would decry if she were in the room with you. She did not believe in national characteristics at all. She would have called these Slavic speaking people rather than, or Bohemian speaking people, Polish speaking people, not Polish people, like that's an essentialized trait. She didn't believe in that. She believed in that ontological unity. And so they just happen to speak these languages and be very generationally influenced by these places. She did not believe there was a German character, a British character, a French character. These are people who were Slavic speakers or Hungarian speakers. It's a big difference.
Yes, very interesting. Robin?
Yeah, I think one Slavic person you haven't mentioned, who to my mind is the most memorable but has not been covered well, is Rosa Schwimmer, of course, from Hungary.
Yeah, but she wasn't Slavic.
I thought you were mentioning Hungary was Slavic.
No, it is not. It is Finno-Ugric language. It is one of the few non-Slavic language groups in Eastern Europe. So, she was a prominent Hungarian, I believe a Magyar-speaking Hungarian, which is Finno-Ugric. They're related to the Finns. and also in a more diffuse way down to Turkey. Bela Bartok actually said he could understand, the composer said he could understand whole sentences of Turkish. But, you know, look up that language group, and that's where the Hungarians are. And so, yeah, she was very prominent, but I wasn't doing prominent people. I was not doing that. I was doing what Emily Greene Baltz did, was to talk to the people who weren't prominent. They were just anybody, the nobodies, basically.
But
And Robin, your grandmother was a friend of Schwimmer.
yeah, definitely. I mean, Schwimmer was adequate in multiple languages. She traveled around. She spoke Hungarian. I don't know all of the languages she spoke, but she was a remarkable person who actually, there has not been an adequate biography of her yet, despite.
We should have one.
Pardon?
I said we should have one, and if I live long enough, I could help put that.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, the thing is, half of her life and half of her papers are in Hungary and are in Hungarian and German. And then she came to England in the beginning of the First World War. She could not go back, and she came to the United States and was a dear friend of my grandmother's. But she was very opinionated, or she believed her position strongly, and apparently, you know, had mixed feelings. People had mixed feelings about her, and the fact of living in two countries with separate languages and the fact that she ruffled people's feathers, I think, are two of the factors that might explain why there hasn't been a biography of her yet.
You know what, Robin? I find this with immigrants, and that Josefa Humpel-Zeman did that too. I mean, she was so brilliant and so young, but she was so adamant in her feminism. That may have been a little bit of a riff with the residents at Hull House. And by the way, I have a Hungarian immigrant friend named Ildiko Melis, and maybe I can get her interested. If I can, maybe she could help translate, you know, things from Hungarian.
That would be wonderful. I mean, a lot of the papers are in the Schwimmer-Lloyd collection in the New York Public Library. And I'm sure there's dialogues with Emily Greene Baltz and so on. Gloria, have you or Ellen, have you been able to go to the New York Public Library?
Yes, I have looked at it. I didn't have a target in mind at that time. I was just looking at it in a general, what was there, what were in holdings kind of thing. But my friend Ildiko has also had this feeling. She teaches on a tribal college in Upper Michigan, and she's about to retire. But we tried to put together an anthology of Eastern European writing because they dropped them out. The minute the Cold War ended, they just got rid of all the Eastern European writers in the first year composition literature anthologies. They just disappeared. I don't know if a lot of you know that. It was like they were the parsley on the plate and they can go.
Wow.
Yeah, it was terrible. They're not represented anymore. I see Cheryl's hand is up too. Are you done then, Robin, or you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Admitting my ignorance in this field, could you please expand on the word ontological?
Well, this is actually from Katya's talk, and maybe I should. So maybe I should send it over to Katya because it's her understanding of Baltz. So take it over, Katya.
That's what Baltz said. Ontological means the nature of things, the nature of beings. And so she said humans are humans. They're not something else. And so all humans are one thing. So the reality is that we have one human race. There are no races. Like I think that Gloria said it really beautifully earlier. There's no Slav as a race, right? African American are not a physical, biological race. The humans are a race. and then race as a social category that we construe, and then we structure the relations among us. But that's a social category. It's not a innate biological or genetic trait.
Genetic, right. It's not a genetic trait. It is totally a political type of construct.
Political, that structure relations of power among groups of people.
Thank you.
Trump is taking that off of the website now.
Yeah.
It's big, yeah, I think that's important.
Trump is taking any kind of reference like that off of the federal websites about race being a social construct.
Mm-hmm. Are there any more questions here? How about on Zoom? Then I have one for everyone, some of which have been answered by our speakers, and that is, what have you learned from these brilliant women? Maybe from these presentations, maybe you learned it earlier.
Katia, do you want to go first?
I think that my idea that when I said that I really admire Emily Greene Baltz, and I'm honored that I teach in the college where she taught, that I walk the same grounds that she was. I really mean it, and I also mean that we have to take her for who she was and not an idealized version of who she was, because that for me is a big teaching, that if we take any of these figures as these idols, we will never be able to live up to them. And so the acceptance of human imperfections and the constant will to learn about what we don't know, and the knowledge that we don't know what we don't know. And so, and not be like too arrogant about it. I think that that's what I take. And I think that Emily Greene Baltz was a model for that.
Thank you.
And I would like to add, they were models of inductive thinking. I think that's an important word that I'd like to leave people with. Inductive thinking, not only deductive thinking. Deductive is what Katia was just talking about, that you have all the answers and you're just looking for evidence that will bolster what you already know. Inductive thinking is what both Baltz and Jane Addams were masters at. And I grew up among the descendants of the people who were part of being neighbors of Hull House. My ancestors were, some of them on one side, Bohemian, Irish, and various. So it's hard not to idealize and make someone into an icon like Jane Addams, because there's Hull House, it still stands, and things are named after her all over Chicago. But she, like Emily Greene Baltz, had Victorian holdovers, and Rima Lunine Schultz is doing a fantastic job. She's lost her eyesight, but she's going on. She's still doing her research, filling in tediously and very detailed ways that all these gaps hurt the picture. And she is always telling me, oh, people don't realize this, how they misrepresent Jane Addams. So hopefully we'll be hearing more out of her. And yeah, and she doesn't know it all either. She's just trying to fill in like a puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle. And I hope that made sense. I don't know if it did.
Ms. Russell.
Yes, well, I just want to say I'm really inspired by Emily Greene Baltz's legacy. And for me, it means that we have a responsibility to use our knowledge and our resources to help people, not only within our communities, but in all communities, and to use our knowledge for good. So I think that's really demonstrated here with your scholarship and your work, that it's not just residing in a book or in academia, but it's really overflowing into the community. And so I'm inspired by that and learned a great deal today. So thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you so much for putting that so well. We appreciate the audience too.
Yes.
You bet. Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing that Carrie Chapman Catt said, is that these four mothers did all this work, and it's our responsibility to take it on. It's not just in books, as you just said, but it's, we've got to continue to do the work that that they started, and yeah, we have to do it.
Anyone else? Yes, George. And we have to keep doing it, because as much as we work on all these problems, they keep repeating themselves. So it's never ending.
Oh, could I, oh, sorry. Could I say what Jane Addams said? I didn't mean to cut you off there, but she said, underneath it all, you may think this is a quote from Newer Ideals of Peace, I can't remember which book, but she said, these battles, and it was the daily reports of World War I, you know, the second battle of Ypres and things, people would say, oh, 10,000 killed by gas in 2 hours. There's no hope for our movement. And Jane Addams said, no, these are but the top level of little waves in the ocean. At the bottom of the ocean, the deepest part of the ocean is peace. These news reports. So keep that one in mind too. Cheryl.
Yes, another question. At the beginning, Eileen explained to us who was allowed to nominate people for a Peace Prize, a Nobel Peace Prize. So do we know who nominated Emily Greene Baltz for the Peace Prize?
No, it takes 50 years before anything is divulged. I also mentioned that it is past 50 years.
It's past. Yeah.
However, I haven't even been able to find out how much money they got.
No, it was, I think that either Gloria or in one of your slides, there was a piece of newspaper that said 34,000. And then there were some notes.
For what? For Addams or for Baltz?
For Baltz. But I don't know if it was split, because she was doing it, she shared the prize with most.
Could have been double.
Yes. And then also there was a note in that slide that said something like, I was fired in 1918. Oh, in the Wellesley movie. I was fired in 1918. But then 20 years later, 30 years later, the Wellesley president nominated me for the Nobel Peace Prize. So I think that there must have been more than one people, but the Wellesley president at the time, Wellesley College president, nominated her.
I think there is information about both of those answers in the Randall book. Yes.
Yes,
I did not find that particular answer though. I read that. It was actually an excellent read.
Mm-hmm. Well, as part of our literature over here, we do have the nominating speech from Jean, J-A-H-N, who's
on the table.
We have it here, and it's very lofty and worthwhile taking over there.
Can I say a word about what was brought up in Katya's or one of the other speeches, was that we don't know why they haven't been, more in the American mainstream of culture. And I explored that, but more about Jane Addams. I found out that Jane Fonda had a biography and was thinking of making a biography about Jane Addams, that she probably never got funding. And I think it has to do with that it doesn't make any money for our contractors and our defense industry. I think if it did, we would have a biography every year on the two of them.
Good point.
Yeah.
It would be a series to have.
Yeah. Well, Baltz brings up a real challenge for all of us feminists, that it's the kind of feminism that she believed in, and why she created the Peace Party. It's worth reading the book, The Improper Bostonian, but it's a real challenge to figure out how we can make sure that her goals and focus and her mission is understood well within the present day feminism, which is very earth-centered, and it's not as anti-nuclear, it's not as disarmament oriented, it's and I'm talking about a more mainstream today. We are a very special organization in that we focus on that. So it's worth keeping up the challenge and figuring out why we can't get an Emily Greene Baltz and Jane Addams in the forefront of those.
Because now we have Hillary Clinton instead.
Yeah, we have
That's
a
the
Hillary
kind-
Clinton.
that's the-
who's a
warmonger. Yeah,
Yeah, so we have to be very
that's
careful.
the kind of feminism that we have.
Yeah,
I mean, not all of
unfortunately.
it.
So it is worth, but she was, but using some of the examples that we have from her is worth bringing to those consciousness.
That's true. And part of it, as you were saying, Ellen, is that the assumptions about what constituted womanhood as a concept were different at the time of Baltz and Addams. And now women have been allowed into the old boys club of the military. And that has made a revision of what it means to be a woman. And several people in WILPF are starting to deal with. Peggy Dobbins wants to do some studies on that. How do we deal with a different concept of women and still try to make our points and make them louder, more persuasive than the women can be what they want to be in the army, you know, kind of thing.
Yes, well, NATO is doing a fabulous job of recruiting women.
Yep. Oh my
NATO
God,
is
unfortunately.
really making women at the forefront, and they're using a lot of women's lib principles and rhetoric to do it, and they are bringing in lots of women into NATO.
That's right.
So that's why it's important to you to see Emily and Jane. It's important.
I think Cheryl has her hand up.
And Ginger's after her. Ginger
okay.
had for our Boston members here and present. Go ahead.
Yes. So just to, I think you're welcoming people to join WILPF, and in particular, I would like to welcome them to join the Disarm End Wars Committee, of which I am a co-chair, and to say that I will be, that our disarmament professional group is called Reaching Critical Will, which I believe our first speaker spoke about. And Ray Atchison has recently written a paper. The United Nations Office of Disarmament Affairs asked people to submit papers about essentially about the effect of war on the sustainable development goals, which I hope you're all familiar with, the United Nations current Sustainable Development Goals. Anyway, Ray Atchison wrote a fabulous paper and has a whole section on the feminist view of militarism and why we need a feminist peace. So, and it is my intention to send to the Disarm Committee listserv a copy of Ray Atchison's article that she wrote for the United Nations. The Secretary General of the United Nations specifically asked for input to help him work out how we could do better in reaching the goal of the United Nations was started, as I hope you all know, to prevent war. The very first resolution of the United Nations from 1946 was not to allow the development of nuclear weapons. Okay, and we are failing on that. So anyway, just to welcome people. If you join WILPF, I hope you also would join the Disarm Committee, and I will be sending out some information from Ray Atchison shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Ginger Harris.
I was going to say, in response to the comments about how women have been allowed into the military, et cetera, and we've got some famous women all over who seem to be militaristic. And by the same token, men are also coming to what used to be considered the women's point of view of peace, the importance of peace. Of course, they always were, but I mean, we have to recognize it's a two-way street.
Thank you. So important. Is Virginia going to say something? Well, I have some words of summary, which my co-chair, Virginia Pratt, is much better at. And she has kind of lost her voice because of a problem. So I would just like to highlight a few things that I have learned and you have heard. One, that our problems are a result of lack of imagination. That we're not perfect. We have blind spots. We all do. And we shouldn't be putting down those who are less fortunate. There was a point about stubbornness. And I took this very personally because I think it's a good quality to be stubborn about your morals and your principles. Because sometimes I feel like our society is going down the tubes without these standards. I also remember the beliefs that you are somehow more superior over others, especially with the racial issues, are such hogwash. And what has come up is the humanism of both Jane Addams and Emily Greene Baltz. It is a tall order to dedicate in many ways your whole life, have to admit. But when someone goes to a place like Haiti and has the brilliance to say there is no such thing as benevolent rule, because I heard as a kid there's benevolent dictatorship in certain countries. I bought into it, but I was 20 years old at the time. This is not it. And I do want to wrap up with the chairman of the Nobel Committee, Gunnar Jan, Y-A-N, pronounced correctly. She, Miss Baltz, has shown that the reality we seek most must be won through hard work in a world in which we live. But she has shown us more than this, that one does not become exhausted and that defeat gives new courage for the struggle to those who have within them the holy fire. I wish you all walk out of here with that holy fire. Take care of yourselves so you can continue the work. Thank you.